I have a little breaking news for you.
Yes, sir.
Dean Obadiah, a lawyer and Sirius XM host, just posted, and I've reposted, a flag that he says is being flown outside the courthouse where the Trump closing argument's underway. And that flag says Trump or death.
Wow.
It's at my Twitter and Threads feeds, and it turns out that flag is for sale on the internet for, depending on what size you want to buy, as little as about $45. But you know, I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist. I thank you. The picture just went up for those watching.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. So I would defend the right of the scoundrels who are carrying the flag, but that also means one has a right, and I would argue duty, to denounce such despicable, un-American, anti-democratic behavior in support of someone who's on trial for criminal conduct and has already been found to have committed 10 criminal contempts.
Well, I mean, cult almost doesn't describe the kind of stuff that this has now been up to. I mean, you know, basically that flag describes that sort of fealty that a lot of Americans feel to this guy, to the point that, I mean, they showed up on J6 and, you know, tried to invade the Capitol building, did invade the Capitol building, but I mean, they tried to violently, essentially take down government at the time. But this, I think, I want to ask you basically a follow-up on what you've just said. I mean, is it undemocratic, David, or is this just a First Amendment stuff that we just have to swallow?
Well, I think
or
we
is
have
it
to
both?
follow it. I mean, I think that one has a right under our Constitution to fly a flag like that. There are limits on all of our rights, every single one of them. For example, your freedom of religion would not allow you to revive the Aztec religion and start sacrificing virgins on an altar by cutting their beating hearts out of their bodies. In the case of speech, if you tell about troop movements during a time of combat, the government can restrain you if possible, the prior restraint, but more importantly, the government can also prosecute you for that. And commercial speech, where you're trying to make money off something, is not protected. One of the people who went to prison because of my reporting that shamed the IRS into finally acting to prosecute a bunch of tax cheats was a fellow who sold books on how to defeat the tax system. And he had a minimum of 51,000 people just in Nevada follow his advice. And what the courts held was, you're free to say the tax system is a fraud and you don't have to pay taxes, no issue. The minute you start selling a kit, here's how to cheat, here's how to violate and overcome the tax laws, that's a crime. You can go to prison for that, as he did where he died, Irwin Schiff.
Remarkable. Kim, did you have something for David? Oh, I can't hear Kim, but...
Kim, you're muted.
I don't even know if this is worth mentioning, but it strikes me on this flag, the date 1776 on one side and 2024 on the other. Are they trying to say that the 2024 is a significant year in American history? Or
yeah.
Are they trying to compare, like, make him into a founding father? Like, what? Please explain.
Revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
The argument by the extreme MAGA cultists is that without Trump, there is no America. I mean, Trump says that, basically. And that's the argument that they're trying to make. And, you know, Trump has had a handful of people show up to support his trial. You'll remember he said there'd be a bloodbath. And it's been very minimal. And in fact, if you look at this photo carefully, you'll notice there aren't very many people. It's a couple of folks. And Trump, of course, was booed heavily at the Libertarian Party conference last weekend.
Yeah, that Libertarian blowback was interesting. It's not like speaking at CPAC. I think he was expecting that.
Yes.
And he got considerably more blowback. I mean, you know, the Christian right, as reflected by so much of his support, and certainly these, Supreme Court judges who are, literally flying the flag of Christian nationalism, they don't identify with libertarian ideals, I don't think. Do they, David?
Yeah, some, but generally no. And libertarianism is fundamentally the concept that we don't need government. We can all operate from contracts with one another. And there's a very excellent, very short philosophy book called The Myth of Ownership that I reviewed in the New York Times sometime in the late 90s that shows the fundamental philosophical error in libertarianism, which is that we all start off equally. And obviously we don't. So that the whole principle goes out. A lot of the people around Trump, particularly Steve Bannon, they're anarchists. And it's important for us to understand that they're anarchists. And then many of them are anarchist totalitarians. Donald Trump has said many times, you shouldn't be allowed to write or say things about him unless he approves of them. What could be more un-American? I mean, I've described the job of President of the United States in lectures as 4 or 8 years of being criticized for everything you do.
Well, it's really a bit ironic, too, and kind of rich that a guy who trashes, I mean, smears, just slaughters people with rhetoric daily. On Memorial Day, I was just reading everybody, his post on Memorial Day it's laughable, but also horrible. I mean, the idea, Happy Memorial Day, and then he just starts smearing Democrats, all the judges. He gets to all of them by name. I mean...
Well, one of the things to remember about Memorial Day, many Americans seem confused about it. Memorial Day is to honor those who did not come back. It is not about veterans, even 100% disabled veterans like my father. It is to honor those who died. And what would be happy about that? Why would you say Happy Memorial Day? Well, only if you don't understand what it means. Both Joe Biden and Barack Obama put out statements about them. They are thoughtful, compassionate, properly toned statements. And Donald Trump is, Donald just believes that he's better than all the rest of us. He's special. And if you don't recognize that, well, we'll deport you. We'll round you up. We'll whatever, because he thinks he's special. And clearly there are tens of millions of Americans who share this view, including people who call themselves Christians. Now, let's be clear. Many of the people who call themselves Christians espouse beliefs. You can turn on TV, as I've done, and watch them on TV that have nothing to do with the message of the New Testament. Nothing.
And by the way, just as a side note, it's interesting how there's an effort to kind of morph Memorial Day. This is really, it's not related to the price of eggs, but it's sort of, I've seen remember and honor and I always associate honor with people who are living. You're honoring people. You can honor the memory of people, I think, is also the way. But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think there's an effort to pivot Memorial Day to honor both veterans and those who've lost their life. But you're right; it's for those who didn't come back, for those who've made the supreme sacrifice.
Yeah, and remember, Donald calls those people losers.
Yeah, and that was confirmed.
Demonstrated repeatedly his disrespect for them, including when he called the widow of Sergeant David Johnston and proceeded to insult her. Because he had no idea how to tell someone, as a president must do, that a member of the armed services has died. And he had no idea how to do that, even though he was guided by his chief of staff, a retired Army general or Marine general. He had no idea how to do it because he has no understanding of things like this.
Well,
so
Kelly,
you asked a question at the beginning of the show, Mark.
Yes, sir. Did you expect it? Right. Could you have anticipated this?
Well, in that book, I anticipated that Trump would never leave the White House peacefully, and said that. I didn't state this because there were no set of facts at the time to use it, but I anticipated and said to family and friends a lot, that Trump is running a high risk here, that he will finally be prosecuted for some of his many, many crimes. Because it used to be he wasn't that big a target, and we spend very little effort in this country, very little, to go after white-collar criminals. Tax being the area I know best, there are only about 500 people a year convicted of tax crimes, federal tax crimes, and most of those are drug dealers, people who paid bribes to politicians, or politicians who took bribes. Just straight out cheating on your taxes, which Donald does blatantly. And I've written about at great length in articles and columns in my books. There's almost no enforcement of the law in that area. It's part of the reason he got away with so many of the things that he did.
And you've made that point so beautifully that, in a way you could skulk around and get away with this stuff. But now that you've, essentially advertised yourself in all these different ways, you're just a much bigger target. You had said that the bad behavior of Donald Trump is something that within this trial framework is going to come back and haunt him. Can you speak to that, please, David?
Sure. Well, the jury today has heard the closing argument of the defense. Trump complained over the weekend that it's not fair the prosecutors go last. Well, that's the way it's been in America for basically forever. And in fact, in every jurisdiction I know of except New York State, the prosecution goes first, the defense goes second, and then the prosecution gets a second bite at the apple. In New York, it's defense, prosecution. So if anything, it favors him. The defense has, I believe, finished its argument. They were wrapping up the last time I looked at the live feeds. If the prosecution can complete its argument today, the jury will get charged today, but I would guess it'll be tomorrow, and they will get instructions from the judge and begin deliberating. Where this is going to haunt Trump is two areas. The nature of the argument made by Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, this morning, in some cases, as I read his words, favored the prosecution. And he confused things in a way and brought up things that you want the jury to have forgotten about. And clearly he was operating on Donald's instructions, because the proper closing argument would be very short and simple. Ladies and gentlemen, they failed to prove their case. They put on a convicted liar named Michael Cohen. They put on a money-grubbing porn actress who lied about what happened. And yes, checks were written, and that's not a crime, and sat down. I mean, not literally that brief, but as
sure.
mean as that. But of course, Donald instructed his lawyers to do as they did on cross-examination of Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen on what to do. So they followed his directives. The judge now will role in this will become very important when it comes time, if Trump is convicted, as I anticipate, to sentence Trump, because his recalcitrant behavior and his attacks on the judge, which were completely allowed, he couldn't attack the judge's family or court staff or witnesses, and 10 times he violated those rules. The judge at sentencing has a lot of discretion. I mean, he can give him, if he's convicted, informal probation, which is a nothing, or he can give him the longest sentence the law allows behind bars. And this is where I think that will come home to roost. His penalty, whatever it is, will be worse. And I would cite to you the example of a couple of tax cheats I wrote about in Sacramento. When they got to court and the judge gave them a pretty light sentence, they proceeded to denounce the judge and do the same thing Trump is doing. The judge just put them in prison each for, I think the husband got more than 10 years and the wife got about 8, when they would have gotten the most minimal sort of sentence.
It's remarkable, the cranked up anger machine that Trump has really traded in successfully. It doesn't work in this context quite as well, and from a legal standpoint, right, David? I mean, in other words, you can play it to the cameras, but it doesn't work in court the same way.
Right, and it only is going to work with those people who share your anger. Now, one of the things we need to have a serious debate about after we get past Trump, and that we've been having to some degree, and I've been an instigator of for 20, almost 30 years now, is how the 90% have been left behind by our government rule book. I mean, the distribution of income in this country that creates over 500 people a year whose annual salary is over $100 million, that creates billionaires and quarter trillionaires. Partly that results from innovation and business luck or success, but a great deal of it is government rules. And that's the reason companies spend so much money in Washington, is if you can write the rule book, you can suppress wages, you can reduce opportunities for people to seek a redress for their grievances. And so a large segment of the US population is legitimately upset about their economic circumstances. And while both parties bear some responsibility, it's over the responsibility on the side of the Republicans is they push these things and continue to push them. On the Democrats, it's they didn't have the spine to stand up. And even when, you know, it might have cost you getting reelected, done the right thing.
I want to pick up on that because when you talk about the big money that is driving our Supreme Court now, that is driving, I mean, it's driving our political system for many years. As you say, you've been writing about it for many years and it's been driving. But it's interesting with this insanely flawed candidate. I mean, that's kind in a description of Donald Trump. I mean, he is fatally flawed in so many ways, not the least of which is that he wants to dismantle the government and essentially be an autocrat.
Yeah.
He has support, and this is a coming event on June 6th in San Francisco, from these tech bros, you know, David Sachs, who was one of the founders of PayPal, Chamath, who is one of the handful of people involved in Facebook at the very beginning. And this will be an event at David Sachs's Pacific Heights mansion. And this was, by the way, just as an aside, this is the kind of money we're talking about. It was, at the time of its sale in 2012, the most expensive house on the market in San Francisco. So that's where this fundraiser is going to be. Donors are going to need to spend at least $50,000 to enter the fundraiser, but they are looking for $500,000 per couple. And throwing in on this, other tech bros like Elon Musk, et cetera. But in Sachs and Chamath, you have these cutting-edge tech bros involved in all of this transformational technology. And I'm wondering, David, they're most concerned with taxes. Is that the reason they would sign on to someone like Trump? Why is he getting that kind of support?
Well, taxes first and foremost, without doubt. At a social event here in Rochester, I was seated next to a young man, and I asked him why his parents, the family is black, were Trumpers. And he said, "Oh, taxes. It's entirely taxes." And I said, "Well, he's a stone cold racist." And the son said, "Yeah, well, as my mom says, they're all racists," meaning white people. And so I can see the logic in that. I think it's short-sighted, but I can see that. The appeal of Donald Trump is this mistaken belief that he will make things better, and they were better. And I extensively, as you know, documented Trump's economic performance before the pandemic, job creation, wages, et cetera. And we initially gave him a grade of C, and then when new data came in, we lowered it to C-. On the other hand, Biden's economic performance is just off the chart. Even after if you want to not count the jobs destroyed by the pandemic, Trump still underperforms Biden in job creation, in real wage growth, among the bottom 50%. People make less than basically $40,000 a year. And that's per household. So often that's two people providing income. And a whole host of other factors. And part of the proof of that is record amounts of money are going into people's retirement accounts. And we just had record air travel for this 3-day weekend. This is not a society, as Trump keeps claiming, and 60% of Americans believe, that's in a depression. So a lot of this, I think, is people hoping or wishing for something. And I also think it's not unreasonable to wonder how much of this is racist. Lots of people who hold deeply racist views are really largely unaware of them. When I was sent to stay with my father came from New Orleans with his family in the summer of 1963. The thing I was most shocked by was the willful blindness to acts of racism I saw every single day. They just go, there's no racism. What are you talking about? And that's what I see in a lot of Trump supporters and in their public comments. They're just blind. And this is troubling because business needs reliable government rules. It needs to have predictable regulations and tax. And businesses will adapt. If you raise the tax rate or lower the tax rate, businesses will adapt to it. You don't run your business on the taxes. You run your business to make money, and then you worry about the taxes.
Well, the tax collection, and you detail this as well, the part of the IRS, and I think you've just referenced it even in this conversation, the arm of the IRS involved in trying to catch white-collar criminals or pursuing them. I mean, some of the stuff is glaring. I mean, one of your books details a lot of the ways in which at high end, with real estate, you can play all kinds of games with the tax code. And but it has to be enforced. And that enforcement is something that clearly the right is very much dedicated to dismantling completely, and they do it by taking away funding, I guess.
Right, and it is we have thorough law enforcement for wage earners and pensioners.
Right.
You basically can't cheat. You could overstate your property taxes, but most people can't deduct. Only about 8% of people now itemize their tax returns. So the government gets the money out of your paycheck before you get it. And there's essentially no way to cheat, certainly not in any economically significant way, unless you have unreported under the table income. And that's another issue. But if you're a business owner like Trump, especially an international business owner, I mean, Trump fabricated more than 6 non-existent businesses in the tax returns released by the House Democrats. 6. He did the same thing back in the 80s. He probably did it every year in between, and yet nothing happened. So America has 2 income tax systems, separate and unequal. One is for workers, including, well-paid workers like you and me. And the other is for business owners, especially those in real estate or who operate internationally. They're on an honor system. Unless you get audited, whatever you put down, the government accepts. And we hardly audit anybody. Among people making over $10 million a year, that's 55,000 households, Mark. The latest IRS data shows that only 80 people were audited and told you owe more money. 80 people out of 55,000. By the way, we're getting very close to having 1 million households with $1 million income. We're at about almost 900,000 for 2022. So when we get the data for this year, 25, we'll probably hit 1 million households with $1 million or more income.
And I remember you wrote a column for DC Report, I want to say, about this, not only the schism, not only this chasm between the haves and have-nots, but how real wages haven't really grown through
until very recently. They've been growing now under the Biden administration. A lot of that is due not to the Biden administration, by the way. It's due to local and state minimum wage laws. When San Jose adopted its minimum wage law that was, I think it was $20 an hour, but it was significantly higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 or the minimum for tipped wait staff, waiters, bartenders, busboys. That's $2.13 an hour. And when you adjust for inflation, because it was a 1993 rule, they now get less than $1 an hour. And the rest has to be made up by tips. So the first additional $6.25 that you get in tips just goes to meet the minimum wage law. And the fundamental underlying problem here is that we have not worked enough to deal with the incomes of people at the bottom. You can find all over the internet the example people give of a McDonald's worker in America and in Denmark. In Denmark, you make $22 an hour, which is probably what our minimum wage should be based on productivity. You get 6 weeks paid vacation, you get health care, you get other benefits, and the Big Mac on a comparative basis costs less than it does in America. How do they do that? Well, because they're not being so greedy at the top. Companies have billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to buy back their own stock, but they want to shortchange workers and, in the case of Boeing, safety.
Now, so piercingly true. I have two quickies, David, before I let you go. One is about Eileen Cannon, the Trump judge in Florida, who has just now rejected this appeal from Jack Smith's office for the gag order. It was just denied a few hours ago. Can you speak to that? I mean, that's just more of the fix.
Well, Judge Cannon from day one has been biased in favor of Trump. I mean, she declared in her very first order that he deserves special treatment, which violates her oath of office. In this case, she denied without prejudice, which means it can be brought back, the request to bar Trump from saying things which put in danger law enforcement officers, FBI agents, and other law enforcement officers. She didn't do it on the merits. She did it by saying you didn't negotiate sufficiently with Trump's lawyers to shape the order you want me to sign. So they're going to go, this is a delay tactic again. So they'll go back, they'll negotiate with the Trump team, they'll go back to Judge Cannon. But any federal judge who will not issue an order to protect the lives of law enforcement when there is reason to think there is a need for that. Every judge overseeing Trump criminal, the other three criminal cases, and several of the civil cases has police protection. They're met at home by detectives, they're put in a police car, they're driven to their courthouse, and they're picked up at the end of the day. And the same is true in some cases of their spouses and children. This is a real legitimate threat that's been well documented.
The second thing I wanted to ask you about is just a quick thought on the, continuing revelations around Supreme Court Justice Alito and his, the most recent flag flown at the beach house. I mean, this guy's got more flags and flagpoles, and each one is more disturbing than the last.
Well, Judge Alito has an interesting view of the world. I can't control what my wife runs up the flagpole, but I can control every woman's body in America. The hypocrisy and illogic is just overwhelming here.
God, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Well, I wish I had thought it up, but I didn't. I poached it.
Okay.
We have a real serious problem here with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court depends on trust and public support. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have police to enforce its orders. And what Alito is doing is bringing disrespect on the court and doing so gratuitously. That's, I think, the most offensive part is gratuitously. And, it's now come out that two things. The Washington Post knew about the upside down flag in 2021 and deemed it not to be a story, which I'm just dumbfounded by. I'd love to know the internal story of what happened at the Post with that, because it's inexplicable.
Right.
And then secondly, this at the same time that the judge is saying my wife did that, Donald is saying, well, the Judge Merchan's daughter works for the Democrats, therefore he's illegitimate. You're not responsible for your grown children. 5 of my 8 children are in their 50s. I have some control over what they do. That's absurd. Once you're an adult, and if the daughter was living in the judge's house, I might say that's something different if they ran a business together. But once your children grow up and go away, they're adults and they're not under your control. And the Supreme Court has obviously very different standards for you and for the justices. Oh, wait a minute. Where did they get that idea? I think Donald Trump.
I mean, it's astounding. And sadly, there's just so much power that's resting in that court.
Before we go, I got one little thing I want to draw people's attention to.
Please.
The story on the front page of the New York Times today, it was online on Friday, about Richard Greenfeld, who was Trump's ambassador to Germany, where he operated in a totally undiplomatic way and promoted right-wing autocrats. I mean, you don't do that as an ambassador. And how he, according to people who were in the room, said right at the beginning that the whole, they stole the election, at least for the state of Nevada, was a sham. And they knew it was a sham. It was simply directed at confusing the public by creating a situation journalists had to cover. And I strongly encourage people to read that article. If you're not a Times reader, you can get 10 free articles a month if you just register.
Wow.
If somebody is a reader and has friends, you can gift 10 articles a month to other people. Just gift it. It's a very long story, but it is one of the most damning and most brilliantly reported stories I've read in some time.
Wow.
And this guy,
Terrific.
by the way, expects that he will be either National Security Advisor or Secretary of State if Trump gets back to the White House. He goes around saying, well, if you don't do what we want, I'm going to stop having the State Department deal with this. We'll just bomb you. That's the kind of remarks this guy makes. And he thinks he's a diplomat. So
the entire administration, I suspect, will be populated by those with, again, a loyalty that transcends any kind of constitutional obligation. David, you can find David everywhere now. I mean, he's, as I've said before, the most popular kid at the dance. We appreciate your time today. David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize winner. Thank you, my friend.
take care. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.